Welcome to Geneseo Today. News and insight on issues in and around Geneseo.
Welcome to Geneseo Today, the interview show where we spotlight Geneseo and Livingston County figures. Today I am joined by Holly Watson, Livingston County historian. Thank you for joining us today. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. How are you, Carolyn?
I'm well, thank you for asking. Would you please share a bit about your background and how you became interested in history and how it in turn led to Livingston County?
Absolutely. So I am a Livingston County native. I grew up in Avon, which is just north of here in Geneseo. And I grew up on a farm where there was a barn, and I would always play in the barn growing up as a kid. And I saw these carved names in the stairway of the barn. And after a while, I started wondering about the people who used to live there before me. So that's kind of how I got interested, and it was a long time ago. Over the years, I started to volunteer with the Avon Historian's Office and did a huge research project on my farm because of that name carved in the wall. I never did find out who that person was officially, but it led to a great research project where we learned a lot about the land and how it had gotten into our family and all of the changes of the land where I grew up. During that process, I went to research at the Livingston County Historian's Office and eventually volunteered there as well, which turned into a job. So it's been just sort of a fortunate thing that's happened, and Livingston County and the Genesee Valley more broadly, it's been my home forever other than going to college in Vermont. And so there was really no question in my mind that I would stay here.
Can you further explain what your position entails?
Absolutely. Our office is the Research Center and Archives for Livingston County, so we carry lots of different books, reference materials, photographs, family history, reference material about businesses, events, all kinds of things that have to do with Livingston County history. So we're open to the public, and the public can come in to research their house, their family history, local events that have happened. We get all kinds of fun questions. We also do education, so I do presentations for the public, do social media, and research and writing projects of our own.
Do you work in collaboration with any of the libraries in Livingston County then too?
I do sometimes. There isn't an official partnership specifically, but I do programs at libraries occasionally, and we have a lot of referral services. So if people go to a library looking for family history, the library may refer them to us, and I may refer them to the library for some reason too. So I like to know who the librarians are and meet with them, make sure that our office information is with them so that they know we exist, and so we collaborate in that way.
How do you prioritize which events and figures to focus on in your research? Like, what types of artifacts are most worked with? Is it documents and maps or physical remnants?
So we don't collect artifacts like 3D things like tools or clothing or household goods. We leave that to the historical societies, who usually have a museum and do more displays. So we, as an archives, are collecting paper materials and documentary materials, so lots of photographs and maps and record books, journals, and all kinds of paper things. So in deciding what to work on or what to highlight the most, I like to focus on the kind of undertold stories, which I think you were interested in too, and not always talking about the stories that everyone might tell among themselves all the time, and the most quote-unquote famous stories. So I like to find the undertold stories that are interesting to highlight little hidden pockets of our history. But there are some bigger topics that people are really interested in that I've taken a deep dive on and I'd like to keep working on. One of them is Craig Colony, Groveland, which was once a Shaker community, then it turned into an epileptic hospital, a colony. Basically, there were a bunch of cottages. The colony was supposed to feel like a community unto itself. And so it was a hospital and institution first for people who had epilepsy, and then it turned into an institution for people with a wide variety of developmental disabilities. And that property is always interesting to people. So it's one of the focuses that I'm coming up. I'm going to be working more on that project as far as presentations and perhaps a book project in the future. The questions we get tend to be family history related or property related the most. So we answer questions for people and help them find materials that relate to those sorts of questions. So that's part of our work, to respond to questions find information for people, so help answer their questions. And then if it's our own work doing social media or presentations, the topics can vary, but I like to pick somehow between what people are asking about the most or things that maybe they haven't even thought of yet.
Just as a little side question, do you do any digitizing or modernization of the maps and stuff?
Absolutely. That has been one of the major focuses of our work the past few years. So we've been digitizing a lot of photographs. Maps are large format, and so they can be harder to digitize, but we have some new equipment to do large maps and bound books, which can be hard to digitize on a regular copier. You don't want to turn a bound book over. It can hurt the spine, and it just takes extra time. So we've been lucky to get some equipment that can make those digitizing projects easier. So day to day, we digitize things as they are requested, or if they're a priority for our office because of the kind of content they have, like naturalizations have become a priority to make sure that those are digitized so that they are preserved in the event of some terrible disaster. And we want to make sure that we have a copy of some of those records that are considered especially permanent and important to the county operations. And the newspapers are also another major focus of our office because people use them so much for their family history or any kind of research for local history. We use them all the time too. We rely on them a lot. So we have recently digitized 77,000 pages of newspapers, and they've been recently put up onto a free newspaper site, New York State Historic Newspapers.org. And so they're searchable there now, which has made a big difference in our work day to day. And it's a huge offering to the public also. So that was one of our recent initiatives, which was funded by the Rochester Regional Library Council grant.
So in your work as a historian, you go over the history of the county. So how has the county evolved over time? What are some of the biggest changes you have observed?
I would say so the county has been remarkably agricultural in the past, and it's still remarkably agricultural as far as industry. But that kind of agriculture has changed a lot. So farms used to be pretty diverse and quite small family farms, whereas you see really large, expansive fields now that are more like field crops, like corn or soybeans or something like that. So the kind of agriculture has changed a lot, so the land use has been altered somewhat. There is actually more forested land now than there once was. People had a lot more grazing animals, and we now have fewer like sheep and cows outside. So the land looks a little bit different over the decades. And it was clear cut at one time. A lot more land, like even in Letchworth State Park, if you see it, you feel like it's been a forest and forever, but in fact it was a lot of timber was taken off of Letchworth, and it was very open, and now it has grown back up and it feels ancient. So the land use has changed in that way. I would say transportation routes and modes of transportation have also been major changes over the time in Livingston County and, of course, Western New York. This all goes beyond the boundaries as well. But I guess you can go back all the way to footpaths that the indigenous people were using, so that the footpaths and the course of the Geneseo River determined where people were living and farming and moving on trade routes. Those often turned into stagecoach paths later on, which, again, communities were locating along these major routes like Route 15, 5 and 20, Route 36 and 39, and 63, all those big major roads we recognize today. Many of those started as a stagecoach route, and so the communities that we see along those big roads, like Mount Morris and Avon and Caledonia, they often started as a very small little community and have grown based on the transportation. And then during the mid-19th century, the Genesee Valley Canal was built from Rochester all the way south through Livingston County and beyond. And that was a major trade route for agricultural goods and other things that people were making and getting to their markets. It also moved a lot of people and ideas, like the Erie Canal too, that goes through Rochester. Brought a lot of people and ideas through the area, including even new religious ideas like spiritualism and Mormonism. So the trade routes had a lot to do with just moving more than just goods. But like the Genesee Valley Canal specifically, there are a couple communities that popped up only because the canal was going through, and one of those is Cuylerville, another one is Peffard. For those who may recognize where those are. The National Hotel and the Yard of Ale are 2 canal taverns that still exist today that people might recognize, and those were built right around the time the canal went through. So the canal, with its trade and people moving through, it influenced so much where those communities happened. And the same goes for railroads, so that was another big change. There are a couple communities like Livonia Center versus the village of Livonia. Livonia Center is basically a few houses now, but it used to be the main kind of village in the town of Livonia. But when the railroad went through, everything kind of congregated around the railroad, and effectively the entire village shifted to where the railroad was going. So that change was pretty major throughout Livingston County's history. Interstate 390, I guess, is the last kind of major transportation-related change. And I think that changed where people were able to live to get to work more easily. So parts of Livingston County, like in Avon and Lima, became kind of more bedroom communities for people living in Rochester. People were just more mobile by car at that point. And 390 has, I think, had an effect when it was built in the 1980s on small businesses here, because people could get to Rochester and Henrietta where the big box stores were. And I remember reading about, for instance, an antique store in Springwater. Nobody really drives on Route 15 through Springwater anymore. It's considered very rural in this tiny little village. So they saw a major shift when 390 was built. People are just cruising on through and not driving those smaller back roads where there are small businesses along the road. So that was kind of a major change for the county, I think, having 390 put through. Yeah, finally, I guess there's the tech age, which we're still discovering. There are plenty of impacts that new technology has had on the county over its history, but especially now it's moving very quickly. So I think we're still seeing how that will affect our day-to-day lives here.
Livingston County has a rich history with deep Indigenous American roots and early European settlers, as well as history with agricultural development. All of these factors have shaped the culture of the community. How does the country's heritage and history remain a cornerstone of its identity, both with its residents and just overall?
I would say the past is all around us all the time. So we can see the layers from the earliest days all the way through the 20th century and into the 21st as we keep building things and altering our landscape. I think you mentioned agricultural history. Agriculture has been an absolute cornerstone for our area for a long time. We have excellent soil here and a decent growing season for those who understand what that means. So the agricultural heritage has changed, like the way that we do agriculture, the tools we have, the kinds of crops we grow, and the animals we raise. But agriculture that's a thread that goes through our entire culture here in this area. We also lean on what has come before, as like the Indigenous heritage you mentioned. We may not see day to day or think about very much. And the stories we tell about that has changed too. So a lot of times in the early 20th century, there were signs put up and memorials to Revolutionary War events that occurred in this county. And the way that those are told can feel biased to us today. So the story of the Indigenous people here it's changed over time from kind of they were so wonderful and powerful once, but now they're gone. And that is hard to get past. It's easy to think that the Indigenous people are just gone and are not, don't live here anymore, which, it's different than it used to be, but there's still an Indigenous heritage in this area and a strong connection of the Seneca to this region, which I think people are talking about a little bit more these days. The early European American settlement, I think we still talk about a fair amount, and I feel like people refer back to that time, the pioneer era. They refer back to that time pretty frequently, and there's a lot of kind of legendary heroism that goes along with that, but we carry it to the current day.
So Geneseo was named a National Historic Landmark in 1991. What makes Geneseo a village of such great historical significance?
I want to say everywhere is historically significant. Geneseo is really well positioned in this region to be a hub of commerce and political power. So the way that it developed kind of represents how the United States was evolving at that time. So significantly, this is the location of the Treaty of Big Tree in 1797, which was the treaty between the United States and the Seneca Nation. And it was when the Seneca Nation ceded most of their land in western New York to the United States, reserving several reservations, is what we call it. But that was a huge watershed moment for all of western New York because it opened this land to white settlement. At least that's the way we talk about it today. It changed the dynamic of who was living here and who could purchase land. So from that point, this is the European American historic landmark. Obviously, there were hundreds of years of indigenous settlement here before that happened that we should consider in our landmark status, but I think it's the built environment of the village of Geneseo. So the evolution of this region, of this town and village, is representative of the development of western New York in a lot of ways. You can't really talk about it without the early European American families that were pretty powerful, like the Wadsworth family, and through their political and land power, the village developed and western New York developed. So Geneseo is significant in those ways.
Discoveries in Livingston County have been newsworthy as of late, including last year. So the discoveries of a partially preserved cadaver from a burial site and a recently discovered African Methodist Episcopal Church in early 2025. So how do these findings impact the historical understanding of Livingston County?
Great question. The skeleton that was discovered is believed to be part of the old Livingston County poorhouse. Poorhouse has been one of my research topics for a long time, and it helped us learn more about the original poorhouse farm that was closer to that area where the skeleton was found, and then later it's now where the three bricks are, so Strange Design and Oak Valley Inn, those brick buildings is where the Livingston County poorhouse ended up being. So I've studied those buildings and the cemeteries that have gone with them. So that discovery was very interesting as far as learning more about the when and who and where. And the African Methodist Episcopal Church was really exciting to find. There have always been African American residents in Geneseo. Usually the percentage is fairly low, but it was exciting to see that this small group had come together to form an official church. It was really early in 1841. So at that point, slavery was now illegal in New York State, but it was still legal in many other states, especially in the South. So it's interesting to think about what those people's lives were like when they formed their own congregation, small as it was, and even if it didn't last for a really long time, as far as we can see, there's very little documentation about it. So it's very tantalizing. We'll be looking for more. But with every new discovery, there's always something more to learn about our communities and how they used to be, but that also, of course, informs us about how we have come to be here today and why our lives are the way they are.
If you're tuning in now, this is Geneseo Today, and I am with Livingston County historian Holly Watson. So we have covered historical significance of Livingston County and Geneseo, but now I'm going to ask kind of a big but simple question. Why is history so important?
Oh, that's a good question. It's a hard one to answer, too, sometimes. I think the many scholars and historians will say that history is important to understanding where we've been so that we can continue building on that foundation. If we don't know where we've been, you're kind of starting anew all the time. And even if history feels like it's just old stuff that doesn't feel relevant, there are plenty of stories and things that are relevant about history that you can continue to build on so that we can keep going forward in being more just, being more understanding of each other, and learning from our mistakes.
Like you mentioned, history is very important to recognize and understand. How do you engage younger generations in learning about Livingston County's history?
It was easier to get into the school curriculum at one time, so the ways that New York State curriculums have changed means that kids are studying local history around 4th grade, and their curriculums can be a little more strict, so sometimes it's hard to go on field trips or really get into depth with local history. So I've heard that from many historians who used to be able to go into schools and do a lot of programs or have kids come out on field trips. As a newer historian, I don't have an initiative built in to go into schools a lot at this point, but I think the relevance is key if you're going to engage younger populations. In fact, any population, making history relevant to their lives today is really important. You can't just talk about something old and musty. It does excite some of us, but maybe not everyone. So the fourth grade time period is a great time to get kids working on some sort of project about their own community as far as history goes. I think one of the connectors that needs to happen is educators knowing what resources are available to them in their classrooms. They don't have a lot of time to find things on their own. So there is a New York State initiative called Consider the Source, where historians can put primary sources on a website where teachers can then use those resources to learn more about their own local history or American history. But sometimes these connections are harder to make, and as there's turnover, it needs to be done again and again. So it's on my list to do a little better to connect with educators, tell them what I have available, and be able to go into schools too. I did just meet with a Cal Mum group, so Caledonia Mumford School, met with a group of kids who are interested in local history, and we talked about a prominent woman from their community, Sarah Jane McBride, who is an early entomologist and fly tyer for fly fishing. And they had heard a program I did about this topic, and the kids and a teacher and a librarian got interested in researching her more and perhaps resulting in a historical marker, one of those blue and gold roadside markers about Sarah Jane McBride. So I had a great time presenting to the kids and working with them with some documents, and I'm hoping that they can get their marker and have their research result in something really tangible. So I think something tangible and relevance are really important to engaging everybody. And of course, this goes for college students too. So a lot of times professors may not know exactly what we have, and students may not know that our office exists to help them with research projects they may be doing. So one of our initiatives this year is to get new software that makes it way easier to share information online. So, and especially digitized materials. So far we don't have a great way to do that through our website. So we're hoping that this will be a big improvement so we can put record books and maps and all kinds of digital materials online that just makes it easier to find.
How can the community get involved with helping preserve history?
Well, curiosity goes a long way, so be curious about what is around you. Read a historical marker, read an article, even go to the bar and ask someone who's sitting there, like, if they're from around here, what do they remember? Even like Kelly's is full of history. And the Idle Hour. So right here in Geneseo, you can learn a lot by talking to people out and about. And so being curious is a great first start. If you have material things like books or documents or photographs, you can do a lot by just labeling your own photos. Like, it might be eye-rollingly obvious who everybody is right now, but in a generation or two, you may not have any idea. So it can help a lot just to leave your own documents a little better kept. You can jot down your own memories, keep a journal, write letters kind of to the future, and you can offer these sorts of things, either digital versions or even the physical ones if you need a home for them, to a local historian's office. So like the county historian's office does accept donations of any kind of material these days. So digital photographs, audio recordings of people telling stories, any old journals or things you find in your attic. So one of the key things is to just pause when cleaning out somebody's basement or attic. If you're cleaning out an estate, or if you find things at a sale, pause and think whether they might be useful to someone in the future. And if you want to donate them, if you want to find a home for things that you have, feel free to call us. We can help decide if it's something that people will be able to use in the future to learn more about their community, or maybe it is just junk. Sometimes there's junk too.
Are there any lesser-known stories from the county's past that you'd like to share?
There are so many. It's hard to choose. But, of course, I have a few favorites. One of them is Sarah Jane McBride, who I mentioned a minute ago, who was an early entomologist and fly tyer from Caledonia Mumford area. She's important because at the time she was born in the 1840s. She was working in the 1870s as a fly tyer with her father. They lived near a creek that was full of trout at the time. It was it still is a really excellent water source for the New York State fish hatchery up there. So it's been a kind of a mecca for trout fisher people for a long time. And she was important because she was one of the first Americans to link entomology with fly tying. So her flies were trying to look more like real insects rather than some crazy blue and gold and red feathered fishing lure. So she wrote about the life cycles of bugs. She was like dissecting trout stomachs and learning about her stream ecology and applying that to the business of fly tying. She's also pretty interesting because she has a very mysterious life. We don't know what happened to her. By the 1880s, she disappears. So she's a mysterious figure that, just didn't have quite enough time to make her mark, I think, on the fly fishing industry. But people have, in literature reviews, realized the importance of her work with entomology and fly tying. So she's a local figure I enjoy talking about, and people had forgotten about her because she had a short life and didn't have a long career. She was kind of forgotten. So she's one of my favorite characters to talk about. Another one is Annetta Thompson Mills, who was from Portage, so near Letchworth State Park. And in the 1880s, she traveled to China as a missionary and ended up founding the first known formal school for the deaf in China. And before that time, people who were deaf living in China, many people didn't believe they were able to learn anything. They weren't taught to lip read or write anything. They just were kind of ignored and neglected in society in general. So this school for the deaf, while not here, and Annetta was from here, it was the beginning of kind of deaf culture and certainly deaf education in China. So people from here, we may be a kind of rural county and agriculturally oriented, but a lot of scientists and social reformers have come from here. So even, little hometown people can make a huge impact even internationally. So that was one of my favorite stories that we almost didn't discover it. It was like this little mention in a book where I took a little detour and deep dive and learned a lot about Annetta Mills, who became one of my favorite little hidden stories to talk about. And then another one locally would be Beansville in Geneseo, which is not a recognized place name to many at this point, but most of Court Street at one time was the residence of mostly Italian immigrants, and at one time there was a dry bean processing plant, so they were sorting dry beans and packaging them to sell them, and many of the people working there were laborers who were Italian and maybe recent immigrants, and so the places they lived all along Court Street and Orchard Street, I think, became known as Beansville. So it's really kind of a derogatory name, but it was taken back in the later 20th century, the descendants of the people who grew up along Court Street. And this is before the college expanded to its current footprint with the parking lots down Court Street, which did take out a bunch of the earlier homes along the street. But there's a lot of pride. Even to this day, you'll find people in the community who remember and talk about Beansville. They used to have Beansville reunions and get together and reminisce about growing up in their little Italian community. So something like Beansville is really important to remember, that our communities are built on a lot of people who immigrated here, who maybe weren't born here initially, but became part of the social and cultural and industrial fabric of our communities. And so remembering places like Beansville is important. It remembers all the people who built who we are today.
Is there anything I didn't ask you that you would like to share or highlight?
I'll just repeat again in case I didn't say it well the first time, but the county historian's office is always happy to talk about donations, always happy to talk about any weird questions that anyone has. If you're wondering about family history or where you live, or some monuments or buildings or events that happen in our community, we are always happy to take a deep dive with you. We can work one-on-one with people, and there's no fee to ask us questions or have us help you research. The more information we have, the better we can answer questions, but we are always happy to help anyone who has a curiosity. So please feel free to reach out.
And people can reach you through the Livingston County website.
The official Livingston County website is livingstoncountyny.gov, and you can search County Historian and find us there. We have a webpage with a bunch of different links, probably overwhelming amounts of resources that you can dive into, or you can just call or email us and we'll get back to you quickly about your question.
Wonderful. So thank you for taking time to join us today. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. It was great to be here.
Thank you. This has been Geneseo Today. I'm your host, Carolyn, and today's special guest was Livingston County historian Holly Watson. To keep up with Geneseo figures, listen to the next episode for more things Geneseo on WGSU 89.3, Geneseo's Voice of the Valley.
Thanks for listening to Geneseo Today, news and insight on issues in and around Geneseo. To learn more about this show or to suggest guests or topics, contact WGSU at geneseo.edu.